An agronomist knows from past experience that 85% of a citrus variety seedlings will survive being transplanted. If a random sample of 8 seedlings is taken from the stock, what is the probability that Roman figure 1, that is, only 3 will survive? Roman figure 2, less than 3 will survive? Roman figure 3, none will survive? Roman figure 4, all will survive. Okay? Now, if you look at that question, let's start by writing out the parameters that were given in the question. Okay, the number of survivor, that is 85%. Okay, 85%. Let me just put it 85%. 85% I represent as P. The total numbers of sample. Let me call that the number of sample is that is 8. 8 sample was taken from the stock. Okay. Now we are told to calculate the probability that only 3 will survive. Now from your binomial Poisson distribution, you remember this formula: n factorial all over x factorial into bracket n minus x factorial multiplied by p raised to the power of x multiplied by q raised to the power of n minus xi. Do you remember this formula from your binomial Poisson distribution? If you didn't remember, it is important that you revert back to the class. Okay. Now, if you look at the formula that I wrote on the board, now I want to put down the parameters that is inside the formula. N is the total numbers of sample. Are you paying attention? N is the total numbers of sample. In this case, it is seedlings that we are dealing with. Don't forget, we are dealing with the citrus, that is citrus variety seedlings. So the total numbers of sample is 8. Are you getting it? N is total numbers of sample. X is the probability of the sample that we are told to calculate. Are you getting what I'm saying? That we survive. Please, I want to pay attention. If you didn't understand what I'm saying now, you might not understand how I use the formula to solve the question. Okay? N is the total numbers of sample, and X is the numbers of sample that we survive, that we are told to calculate. You know, from the question, we are told to calculate that only 3 will survive, less than 3 will survive, none will survive, and all will survive. You understand? So those values are X. Are you getting it? So P is the probability of the numbers of seedlings that have been surviving. You understand? Don't forget that this is not the first time that the agronomist will transplant. You understand? So, and the question, we are made known from the question that from the past experience. You understand? So P is the probability of the seedlings that have been surviving from the past. Are you getting what I'm saying? So that probability is what? 85%. Are you getting it? And Q is the probability of the seedlings that have not been surviving from the past experience. That is probability of seedlings that have failed to germinate, that have failed to survive from the past experience. You understand? Don't worry, just pay attention. You are going to understand it while I begin to solve the question. Okay? Now, we have to determine all the parameters that is inside this formula before we can proceed to use the formula to solve the question. Okay? Let's start with n. N is what? 8. N is equals to 8. Okay? And P is the probability of the seedlings that have been surviving. That is 85%. Don't forget that 85% can be written as 85 all over 100. 85 divided by 100, that is 0.85. You understand? So now we have to determine the probability, the Q. That is the probability of the seedlings that have failed to germinate from the past experience. You understand? So if the probability of the seedlings that have been surviving is 85%, the probability of the seedlings that have failed to survive from the past experience will be 100 minus 85. You understand? Because percentage, even probability is measured in 100%. That is, so the value of Q will be equals to 100% minus 85%. Do you understand? So Q is equals to that is 15%. Do you understand? So the Q, the probability of the seedlings that have failed to survive from the past experience is 15 divided by 100, that is what? 0.15. So we have determined the parameter that we need in the formula. Now we can proceed to solve the first questions. Now the first question says we should determine the probability that only 3 will survive. Only 3 out of all the 8 seedlings, only 3 will survive. Now let me just put it here. I want you to pay attention now. The probability that only 3 will survive, only 3. Okay? Now from this formula, this is factorial, okay? This is factorial. Pay attention, okay? This is factorial. N is 8. So I'm going to have 8 factorial all over x. Since I'm determining the probability that only 3 will survive now, so I'm going to represent the value of x as 3. You understand? I'm going to represent the value of x as 3 because the first question says I should determine the probability that only 3 out of the 8 seedlings will survive. So I'm going to substitute the value of x as 3. So I'm going to have 3 factorial all into bracket n minus x factorial. Don't forget that n is 8. So I'm going to have 8 minus x is what? 3. So I'm going to have 8 minus 3 factorial. Please, do you understand? Multiply by p. P is the probability of the seedlings that have been surviving from the past experience. That is 85%, and I convert 85% to 0.85. That is 0.85 raised to the power of x. Since x is what? 3. Don't forget, x is the probability. X is the probability of the sample that we survive. You know, we are told to determine the probability that only 3 will survive, so x will be 3. You understand? If you are told to determine the probability that only 2 will survive, x will be 2. If you are told to determine the probability that only 7 will survive, x will be 7. Do you understand? Okay, so that will be 0.85 raised to the power of x. That is raised to the power of 3. Oh, let me change this marker here. Multiply by q. Q is what? 0.15. So I'm going to have 0.15 raised to the power of n minus x. N minus x is what? 8 minus 3. I'm very sure you understand how I got this. If you didn't understand, kindly reverse back the video. You understand? Okay, let's proceed. 8 factorial is what? Don't forget that factorial, the meaning of factorial is this. If we have 3 factorial, let me write it here. 3 factorial, this simply means 3 times 2 times 1. 4 factorial simply means 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Are you getting it? So if I have 2 factorial simply means 2 times 1. Okay? If I have 7 factorial simply means 7 times 6 times 5 times 3 times 2 times 1. Do you understand? So that is what is meant by factorial. For this, I'm going to have 3 times 2 times 1, that is 6. 4 times 3 times 12, that is 24. Okay? So let's proceed back to our question. I just use that as an explanation, okay? So let's go to 8 factorial. 8 factorial. 8 factorial simply means 8 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Now you have to multiply this together. What is the answer? If you punch your calculator, you're going to get that is 40,320. 40,320. So this is 40,320. So for the value of 8 factorial, I'm going to have 40,320. You understand? All over 3 factorial. Don't forget, 3 factorial is what? 3 times 2 times 1. 3 times 2 is 6 what? 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 1 is what? 6. So 3 factorial is 6. 6 multiplied by, now 8 minus 3 is what? 5. Are you getting it? So maybe I should read one by one. 8 minus 3 is 5. So I'm going to have 5 into bracket factorial. Do you understand? I just deal with the parameters, deal with the content that we have inside the bracket. I've not done anything. So pay attention. Now 8 minus 3 is 5. Multiply by 0.85 raised to the power of 3. That is 0.6141. 0.6141 multiply by, okay, for this I'm going to have 0.15 raised to the power of 5. I'm very sure you understand how I got 5, because that is 8 minus 3. That is 5. Now, we have gotten to this step. You just have to simplify and got the answer. Okay, that's what we are doing. For this, I'm going to have 40,320 divided by, now 6 multiplied by 5 factorial. Don't forget that 5 factorial is what? 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And that will give us 120. So I'm going to have 6 times 120 multiplied by 0.6141 multiplied by, so 0.15 raised to the power of 5. That will be 7.59 times 10 raised to the power of minus 5. If you punch your calculator, you're going to get this. The reason why I don't write this in full is because I want this place to contain it. If you want to express it, you are going to get 0.0000759. You are going to get this. But you know, if I want to write this in this place, it cannot contain it. That's the reason why I change it to standard form. Do you understand? Okay, let us proceed. If you punch your calculator, 40,320 all over 6 multiplied by 120, that is 720. Multiplied by, if you multiply this, if you multiply 0.6141 by 7.59 times 10 raised to the power of minus 5, you are going to get 4.661 times 10 raised to the power of minus 5. Do you understand? 40,320 divided by 720, that is 56. So 56 multiplied by 4.661 times 10 raised to the power of minus 5. This will give us 2.61 times 10 raised to the power of minus 3. And this is also the same thing as 0.00261. Do you understand? So you can approximate it. If you want to approximate it, you can approximate it to 0.003. You understand? Therefore, the probability that only 3 of the seedlings will survive is 0.003. Do you understand? So let's proceed to the next question. That is, we are told to determine the probability that less than 3 will survive. Now, to determine the probability that less than 3 seedlings will survive. Now, let me ask you a question. What do you mean by less than 3? Less than the numbers that are less than 3 are 2, 1, and 0. You understand? That is, we are told to calculate the probability that less than 3 seedlings. That means I'm going to calculate the probability of 0 seedlings, the probability of 1 seedling surviving, then the probability of 2 seedlings surviving. Then after that, I'm going to add their probability. Do you understand? I'm going to calculate each of these probabilities separately. You understand? Then when I'm done, I'm going to add I'm going to sum up their probability. So for the probability of less than 3, that is probability of less than 3 seedlings, that will be equals to the probability of x is equals to 0 plus the probability of x is equals to 1 plus the probability of x is equals to 2. Do you understand? Those are the values that are less than 3. I'm very sure you understand, Abby. So now let us proceed to calculate the probability of 1 and 2 first. When I'm done 1 and 2, I'm going to go back to calculate the probability of 0. Do you understand? That is the probability of 0 seedlings surviving. Okay, so let's start with the first one. The probability that 1 will survive. Okay, 1 will survive. Okay, so now we are still going to use the same formula. Don't forget that n is what? 8. So I'm going to have 8 factorial all over x. In that case, x will be 1. Are you getting it? So I'm going to have 1 factorial into bracket n minus x, that is 8 minus 1. 8 minus 1 factorial multiplied by p raised to the power of x, that is 0.85 raised to the power of 1. 0.85 raised to the power of 1 multiplied by q. Don't forget that q is what? 0.15. So I'm going to have 0.15 raised to the power of n minus x. In that case, n, which is what? 8 minus, that will be 8 minus 1. Okay, so now 8 factorial. So 8 factorial is 40,320. So I'm going to have 40,320 all over 1 factorial is 1. You understand? So 1 multiplied by 7 factorial. Do you understand? Because 8 minus 1 is what? 7 multiplied by 0.885 raised to the power of 1. That will still give me 0.85 multiplied by 0.15 raised to the power of 8 minus 1. 8 minus 1 is 7. You understand? So I'm going to have 0.15 raised to the power of 7. Do you understand? Okay, let us proceed. For this, I'm going to have 40,320 all over 1 multiplied by 7 factorial. 7 factorial is 5,040. So I'm going to have 5,040 multiplied by 0.85 multiplied by 0.15 raised to the power of 7. That is 0.15 in the multiple of 7. That is 0.000001709. You understand? You can write it in decimal in standard form, and you can also write it in decimal form. You understand? But if your book will not contain it, I advise you to put it in decimal form. Do you understand? Okay, so let's proceed. If you divide 40,320 divided by 5,040, that will give us 8. So I'm going to have 8 times 0.85 times 0.000007. That is 1709. So if you multiply this, you're going to get 0.00000116. So this is the probability that one will survive. So let me write this probability at somewhere. Let me write it. Probability that one will survive is what? 0.0000116. You understand? So let us determine the probability that 2 will survive also. Okay? So let's determine the probability that 2 seedlings will survive. So 2 seedlings, probability of 2 seedlings. Don't forget, we are still going to make use of the same formula. You know, we have n factorial. Don't forget that the value of n is what? 8. So I'm going to have 8 factorial all over x. The value of x here will now be what? 2. You understand? Because we want to determine the probability that 2 seedlings will survive. You understand? So the value of x here will be what? 2 factorial into bracket 8 minus x. X is also 2 factorial multiplied by p. Don't forget that p is what? 0.85. So I'm going to have 0.85 raised to the power of x. X is what? 2. You understand? So 0.85 raised to the power of 2. Let me put a bracket multiplied by q. Q is what? 0.15. So I'm going to have 0.15 raised to the power of n minus x. That would be what? 8 minus 2. 8 minus 2. So for this, I'm going to have 8 factorial is 40,000. That is 40,320. You understand? So I'm going to have 40,320. Oh, sorry. This is 40,320. You understand? All over 2 factorial into bracket 8 minus 2 factorial. You multiply all of them like that. You're going to have 1,440. 1,440. You understand? I skip a step here. 2 factorial is what? 2 times 1. That is 2. You understand? So 8 minus 2 factorial, that will be what? 5 factorial. 5 factorial is what? 720. That means that 2 multiplied by 720, that is 1,440. Do you understand? So just pay attention. It's very, very simple. Okay, let's proceed. So and then I'm going to have 0.85 square. That will give us 0.7225. 0.7225. Okay, multiplied by now I have 0.15 raised to the power of 8 minus 2. Don't forget that 8 minus 2 is what? 5. So I'm going to have 0.15 raised to the power of 5. You understand? So if you punch your calculator, you are going to get 0.0000114. So I'm going to have 0.0000114. You understand? So now divide 40,320 divided by 1,440. You are going to get 28. You understand? So I'm left with 28 multiplied by 0.7225 multiplied by 0.0000114. You understand? So if you punch your calculator, you are going to get the probability of 2 seedlings surviving is 0.00023. 0.00023. You understand? So this is the probability that 2 seedlings will survive. Now, we have gotten the probability of one seedlings and the probability of two seedlings is 0.00023. So let's determine the probability that 0 seedlings will survive. We still proceed with the same approach. So for this, I'm going to have 8 factorial all over. In that case, I'm going to represent x as 0. You understand? So I'm going to have 0 factorial into bracket n, which is 8 minus 0 factorial multiplied by p. P is what? P is 0.85. So I'm going to have 0.85 raised to the power of x. And since my x is what? 0. So 0.85 raised to the power of 0 multiplied by q. Q is 0.15. So I'm going to have 0.15 raised to the power of n minus x. So that will be what? 8 minus 0. I'm very sure you understand how I got this. Okay, now let's proceed. 8 factorial is 40,320. So 40,320 all over 0 factorial is 1. Do you understand? So please, I want you to note it. 0 factorial is what? 1. Okay, so let's proceed. 40,320 over 1 multiplied by 8 minus 0. That is what? 0. Abi? So no, 8 minus 0, that is 8. You understand? So I'm going to have 8 factorial. And 8 factorial is what? 40,320. So for this place, I'm going to have 1 multiplied by 40,320. 1 multiplied by 40,320 will still give me 40,320. Do you understand how I got it? Okay, let's proceed. For this, I'm going to have multiplied by 0.85 raised to the power of 0. That will be what? 1. Okay, so multiply by 1 multiplied by 0.15 raised to the power of 8 minus 0. Remove 0 from 8, that is what? 8. So 0.15 raised to the power of 8. That is 2.5629 times 10 raised to the power of minus 7. You understand? So for this will cancel this. You understand? So I'm left with what? 1. So I'm going to have 1 multiplied by 1 multiplied by 2.5629 times 10 raised to the power of minus 7. So if you multiply this, you are still going to have 2.5629 times 10 raised to the power of minus 7. So I can convert this to decimal. It's in standard form, so I can convert it to decimal form. So I'm going to have 0.000002569. You understand? So you can see how you can see that it's very, very long. Okay, so I just prefer it in standard form. So the probability that x is equals to 0, that is none of the seedlings is surviving, is what? 2.5629 times 10 raised to the power of minus 7. Do you understand? So now the next step is that we are going to add all these probability together. They are individual now, but we are going to sum it up to get the probability of this less than 3 seedlings is surviving. So I'm going to have probability of less than 3 seedlings is equals to the probability when of 0 seedlings surviving. That is what? 2.5629 times 10 raised to the power minus 7 plus the probability that only a single seedling is surviving. That is 0.0000116, and the probability of 2 seedlings will be surviving. That is 0.000.
So when I add this together, I got 2.4186 times 10 raised to the power of minus 4 as the probability that all less than 3 seedlings will be surviving. Then I approximate it to 0.00024.
So now we are told to determine the probability that none of the seedlings will be surviving. When you hear the word none, that is 0, you understand? So in that case, I'm going to substitute the value of x as 0, and I've already done that. That is the probability of that I calculated here. If you substitute the value of x as 0, you are going to get this value. That is the answer to the, I think that should be the third question. That is the probability that none of the seedlings will survive. So the meaning of none is that 0. That is, we are going to substitute the value of x as 0. You understand? And don't forget that we have already determined it. You are going to get this value. I'm very sure you understand. If you do understand, watch how I got this. That is the answer to question number 3. That is the probability that none of the seedlings will survive. Okay, so now let's proceed to question number 4, which is we should determine the probability that all the seedlings will survive. So now, when we said all the seedlings, that means all the samples, all the seedling samples that we use in the experiment. That is, and the numbers of samples that we take note that we use in the experiment is what? 8. You understand? So in that case, the value of x is what? 8. You understand? So I'm going to have n factorial, and that is 8 factorial all over 8 factorial into bracket 8 minus 8 factorial. I'm very sure you understand. I just substituted the value of x as 8. You understand? Because the question says determine the probability that all the seedlings will survive. That is, all the samples of seedlings that was used and to carry out the experiment will survive. So that's the reason why I substitute the value of 8. Okay, and n is what? 8. So x will also be what? 8. So I substitute the value of x as 8. So I got this multiplied by p. P is what? 0.85. 0.85 raised to the power of x raised to the power of 8 multiplied by q. Q is 0.15. That is 0.15 raised to the power of n minus x. N minus x. Don't forget that n is what? 8, which is the total numbers of sample. Are you getting it? The total numbers of seedling that we are using. Okay, so that will be 8 minus 8, and 8 minus 8 is what? 0. Okay, so I'm going to have 0. Do you understand how I got 0? You know that the value of n here is 8, and the value of x, that is all the seedling will survive, that is what? 8 also. So that's why I get 8 minus 8. 8 minus 8 will give me 0. You understand? So for this will cancel this. Okay, so I'm left with what? 8 minus 8 factorial. Please, if you didn't understand, kindly reverse back to the video and watch the explanation again. So let's proceed. 8 factorial will cancel 8 factorial. So I'm left with what? 1 over 8 minus 8 factorial. 8 minus 8 is what? 0. And 0 factorial is what? 1. So I'm going to have 1. I'm very sure you understand. If 8 minus 8 factorial, 8 minus 8 factorial, that is what? 0 factorial. And 0 factorial, according to what I told you here, 0 factorial is what? 1. You understand? So that is how I got 1. This 8 factorial cancel this 8 factorial. So I have 1 at the numerator already. And this 1 will multiply all these elements. And when I simplify this element, that is 8 minus 8 factorial, that is what? 0 factorial. 0 factorial is what? 1. So I'm left with 1 over 1 multiplied by, okay, punch your calculator, 0.85 raised to the power of 8. That is 0.2725. 0.2725 multiplied by 0.15 raised to the power of 0. According to the law of indices, that is law of power unity, any number raised to the power of 0 will give us what? 1. You understand? So for this, I'm going to have 1. So the answers to the question is 0.2725 multiplied by 1, which is also the same thing as what? 0.2725. Okay, so the probability that all the seedlings will survive is 0.2725. You can convert it to percent by multiplying this by 100. You understand? So if you multiply this by 100, you're going to get 27.25%. That is the probability that all the seedlings will survive is was 27.25%. Do you understand? So that is how to deal with the question. Okay,